Everyone to the Hello World guys. This is another episode of the advanced platformer series in Unity, and in this video we are going to continue by creating a system for detecting whether the player is standing on the ground and not, and using that system to implement jumping. First of all, we'll begin with the jumping part first. So I'm going to select my player here and I'm going to open up the movement script. And now in order to implement jumping, it is very simple. We just apply a vertical force to the rigid body, and that is going to cause our character to jump. However, jumping alone will not be sufficient, because the character will be able to jump whenever the character wants to jump. But that is obviously wrong, because we only want the player to be able to jump if they are on the ground. So we want to find a way for finding out whether the player is in air or on the ground. So I'm going to open this up and zoom in a bit, and what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and say if input dot get button input dot get button down. And the reason we'll use down here is because well, firstly, we only want to not continuously trigger it, but only trigger it when the actual button is pressed. So yeah, let's go ahead and ask the button is going to be jump. And if the input dot get button down jump works, then what we can do is we can just go ahead and say rb dot add force, and we can just go ahead and do that. And for the force, we can pass a variety of different stuff here. I guess you can pass like vector 2 or and a force mode as well. What we are going to do is we are going to add in yet another serialized field here, which I'm going to call jump force. So let's just set that by default to something like for example, let's set it to 100 for example. And what this is going to do is it's going to basically represent what we need, the force that we need for the jump. So we are going to go ahead and give it a new vector 2, and for the vector 2, for the x we are going to of course pass in 0, and for the y we will pass in our jump force. And that is pretty much that's pretty much all we need to do. However, we are also going to pass in a force mode 2d dot impulse here. So yeah, let's do that. And this impulse will basically means like it's like a sudden impulse instead of something continuous. And now we are going to add that and see whether it works or not. And if of course it will allow our player to jump whenever they want to, but we'll kind of make it later so that we also detect the ground as well. So you can see it's going to compile the script and reload the assemblies, and once it has done that, we can go under our game view, and you can see I've got jump force here, which is set by default to 100, and I'm going to run this application here. And a force of 100 might be a bit too less for you. Of course, we can change it here as well. Let's go ahead and test that out first. And if I press the space key, you can see that the jump occurred, and it was actually a pretty large jump. 100 is a very large force, it seems. That's because that's a force, not speed, so we'll need to set it to something much lower. We'll need to use a force if we'll need to like use a speed if we were doing, for example, velocity directly, but now we are using force, so you can see 2 is making us jump very slightly. We'll just use 10 here. Let's go ahead and use 10, and now what you should see is that it does kind of look normal. It might be still a bit too much. Let's go ahead and test that out, and yeah, it's not too much. Maybe we'll just change that to 8. And now what we can do is we have pretty much got that system done. However, there is a very obvious problem that I'll show you in a second. So if I run this, you can see that I can press the jump key and I can jump, and I can jump again in mid-air, and I can keep jumping. Actually, I can go as high as I want. I can just keep pressing the space key again and again and again, and I'll keep jumping and never stop. Of course, that's a bit of a problem because that's not something we want, and you can see I have pressed it so many times that my force is causing the y value to go on and on, and later I'll just start to fall down. So yeah, that is not exactly what we want. Instead, what we want is we want the player to be only allowed to jump if the player is actually standing on the ground. So in order to implement that, let's go in here, and we'll need to only cause this jump to happen only if the player is actually standing on the ground, and if the player is above the ground, then we should not allow this to happen. So how are we going to implement that? Now, in order to implement ground detection, I'm going to right click on the player and create an empty object. And in here, the only thing I'm going to add is not a script, but instead just like a physics 2D. You can see we've got a bunch of colliders here. I'm going to add in a box collider 2D here. or perhaps you might not want to add a box collider 2D, you might want to add something else, but we are going to add a box collider here. And if I go here and select this, you can kind of see what the box collider looks like. We'll make it different, so we'll basically go ahead and decrease its size on the Y. You can kind of see it very faintly here, to just 0.1. We'll decrease its size that much. Then we are going to move the whole object down to about where the feet of this object are supposed to be, at about -1 exactly, almost, but we are going to 0.98 here instead, like that. Yeah, and that is basically where it's supposed to be, and we are going to change the x size to be 0.75. And this, if this touches the ground, that means the player is standing on the ground. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and I'm going to rename this to ground check, so that we kind of know what the purpose of each object is by looking at its name. So now what we can do is we can create a system for determining whether the player is on the ground or not by creating a separate script here, which I'll call ground check. Let's actually call the script ground check as well. Let's just call it ground check, and we're going to add that script here, create and add, and let's go ahead and open it up here, like inside of Visual Studio. Actually, let's yeah, in here what we can do is we can remove these two functions here, because we don't need any of these, and we can also remove these two using statements. The function that we need is on enter, on collision enter, actually not on trigger enter 2D. We need to create a function on trigger enter 2D, and we also need to create another function on trigger exit 2D. So we will create another function on trigger exit 2D. So we'll go ahead and say on trigger exit 2D, and that is, these are two functions. Now what we are going to do is we are going to create a private int here, which is not going to be serialized, called contact, which is going to represent how much stuff we are hitting at the same time. And what we are going to do is, you can see it says that yeah, we've got that field. What we'll do is inside of on trigger enter, what we'll do is we'll basically increase the contacts. But before we do that, we are going to go ahead and say if collision dot game object, we won't actually check the name, instead we'll check the tag. So game object dot tag is equal to for example ground, let's say. So we'll create a custom tag to represent the stuff which is supposed to be ground, and you might not want to do this, and you might actually want to do this depending on the circumstances. If you want, you can just remove that and just do contacts plus plus, and in here what you can do is you can just say contacts actually minus. The reason we are doing this is because if you might want the player to be able to jump off enemy heads and stuff like that as well. For that, if you want that kind of behavior, the player should be allowed to jump off anything literally, then you probably should make it so that you do not check for the actual ground here. If you want the only player to only be able to jump for ground, you can create a tag. Now for now we are going to leave it at this, and if we ever need to have any limitations, we will add them later. For now we are going to have that. We have got our contacts here. That's pretty awesome. Now what we are going to do is we are going to go ahead and first of all, let's go ahead here, and we are going to create a public field here. So we'll create a public int called contacts here. We are going to implement this as a standard property since we want it to be readable, and we are going to basically say get, and we can use this shorter notation, and this is going to return contacts, and set contacts is equal to value. But however, that is going to be not existent in the public function, because we do not want it to be changed outside. We don't want this value to be able to be changed outside. So in here we are going to also create a reference to our ground check as well. So we have got a rigid body 2D, we'll also create a ground check, which will actually not call the rigid body 2D, we'll call it ground check. Actually, let's just call it ground check. Yeah. And now what we can do is we can take this ground check and only allow the player to jump if the ground check dot contacts here is greater than 0. if the contacts are less than 0 or equal they won't actually be less than 0, but if they are equal to 0, then we probably do not want to allow we do not allow the player to jump. So we are going to do this basically every time we hit something we increase our contacts, and every time we stop hitting something we decrease them, and we only jump when our contacts at least we have got one contact here on our ground check. So that is pretty much all we need to do. It has compiled now. I'll run that application, and now hopefully we should have everything working correctly. And you can see it jumps down. I press the jump button, and you can see it gives an error saying that the object reference was not set. The only reason that happened is because we need to make sure we actually assign the ground check here, and now everything should actually work. So let's go ahead and run that, and what you should see is that I can jump when as long as I am on the ground I can press the jump button. As you can see, I'm still not jumping. The reason for that is because I need to go on the ground check and make sure that the collider is actually a trigger and is not an actual collider. And if I do that, now I should be able to jump when I'm on the ground, but I cannot jump in the air. So even if I repeatedly press my space key, I can only jump while I am on the ground. And of course, we have got a camera movement. I can move around, I can jump, I can do whatever I like. Now before we wrap this video up, I'm going to go under project settings and input, and we are still using the old input manager because well, we should probably switch to the newer one, but we are going to use this right now. So now we are going to go down here, and you can see that we have got jump here somewhere. Yeah, you can see that. And what we are going to do is we have got our positive button as you can see we have basically got it as joystick button 3, and this jump one we are going to also make an alternate positive button called up, and what that will do is that will ensure that we are also able to press the up key to jump. Since it's a 2D game, we want up to basically jump. And now if I press up, I can jump as well, and I can repeatedly press that key and I can jump around the scene, but what I cannot do is jump while in the air. So that is exactly what we want. So yeah guys, this is pretty much it for this video. I'll see you in the next one, in which we'll start making our game more interesting by adding different stuff. So stay tuned for that. Make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss the next one, and share this video with other people as well, and bye.